Okay, good. So I wanted to welcome you all here today. I'm very honored to be able to speak to you all. Today, Reverend Wondra went to Vista, so she's at the Vista Temple today. So I'll be leading service, and I got a lot of help from all the MAs and Reverend Crane this morning. I really appreciate it. So we chanted the Sambutsuge today, and it's a story about a king who remains nameless because I think it represents everybody that's chasing after wealth and fame. And he meets a great teacher named Lokesvara Raja, and it changes the whole basis of his life. He renounces his royalty, and he becomes a Buddhist seeker, Dharmakara, and he ultimately becomes a Amida Buddha. So today I would like to talk about changing the very foundation of our lives, reorienting ourselves. And in Buddhism and mathematics, we call this a change of basis. I've told you that I can talk about three things. I can talk about Buddhism, I can talk about the Beatles, and I can talk about math. So I had 4 Dharma talks ready to go that have to do with math. And we got a lot of feedback from people who said they really like Buddhism a lot, and they like learning about the Dharma, but they said that what really could get Buddhism more engaging and really appeal to Americans is the feedback I got was it just needs more math. So I thought, well, that's great. That's great. I have a math background. So I'm going to kind of follow the theme from Reverend Crane a couple weeks ago. She talked about the most interesting person in the world, and she talked about the GOAT, greatest of all time. And I thought about it, you know, it's not just in sports, right? You know, when you say Hendrix, right, you know that's the greatest guitarist of all time. And when you say Ali, right, the greatest boxer of all time. And in LA, we say LeBron, right? Right? Sometimes I forget what his last name is. It's just LeBron. And then I thought of another really good one today, Mbappe, right? Do you remember Mbappe from the France team in the World Cup, right? He had 3 goals, a hat trick. And I looked him up just now, Mbappe. He has 2 names, right? He has a first name. It's something like Kylian, but everybody just calls him Mbappe, like Pele, right? So when you're the GOAT, you just need one name. And with my math background, I wanted to talk about a very famous mathematician today. When I was at UCLA and I was a math major, on like the 3rd or 4th floor, in the hallways, they had black and white 8x10 framed pictures of every great mathematician who ever lived. And it was in chronological order. And I used to get goosebumps because it would start with like Euclid or Archimedes, and it would slowly move all the way through to the 20th century, you know. And I thought, you know, I got to make these guys proud. I've got to really go home and study my calculus. And we've been debating about where we should put the OCBC presidents' pictures back on the wall. And I've always wished that we could have like a long hallway like that, where we have all the OCB presidents in chronological order in line. And I don't think we'd ever do this, but I wish it was like up the stairs to the 3rd floor in the social hall, right? As you go up those stairs, right, they're just right with you, one by one, going up with you. So the GOAT was from Reverend Crane. And then coincidentally, Tom Crane, her husband, told me a story about a very famous mathematician that I vaguely remembered. And I went and looked it up and refreshed my memory. He's so famous, his name, he's just Gauss, right? He's a one-named GOAT in mathematics. His name is Gauss. And I had to look it up on the internet to find out what his given name is. Because I know Gauss. A lot of things in mathematics and physics are named after Gauss, but I didn't know it's Carl Friedrich. But, you know, nobody knows that. It's just Gauss. He lived from 1777 to 1855. He was a German mathematician and a physicist who made significant contributions in many fields of mathematics and science, and is ranked among history's most influential mathematicians, sometimes referred to as the foremost of mathematicians and the greatest mathematician since antiquity. So he's a big deal. So this is the story that Tom told me, and it all has to do with the way you look at things and the way you orient yourselves. So when I did mathematics, I used to attack it with my pencil, and I would rely on algebra and do tons and tons of writing. But also there's another way of doing it where you can look at it a different way, and suddenly the problem becomes really easy. So if you're doing a math problem that seems super hard, the odds are you're not looking at it right? You're going down the rabbit hole. You shouldn't really have to do hundreds and hundreds of equations because the teacher, you only got a half an hour for your quiz. It's got to be easier than that. So when Gauss was a little boy, this was the story Tom reminded me of. When he was in the 4th or 5th grade, his teacher wanted to take a break, his math teacher. He wanted to eat his lunch. He wanted to check Instagram on his iPhone. He wanted to grade papers. Teachers are always grading papers, right? So what he did is he told the kids, what I'd like you to do is add all the numbers between 1 and 100. And he figured it would take him at least an hour. And Gauss finished in like 5 minutes because he looked at it a totally different way. And I wanted to show this to you. And we can do this in life. So you write down 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way to 100. So you have to do 99 additions. It's going to take an hour, and the odds are you're going to make a mistake, right? The odds are you're going to lose focus and you're going to get the answer wrong. So what Gauss did is he wrote it down again, but he wrote it backwards from high to low. So now we've got the sum twice. We got it from low to high and from high to low. And then Gauss noticed if you look vertically, each column adds up to 101, right? 100 plus 1, 99 plus 2, 98 plus 3. So then Gauss realized there's 100 101s here that need to be added, but it's twice too big because we wrote it twice. So then he wrote this down, 101, 100 times. It's twice too big. So what he did then is he just said, well, that's just 100 times 101, twice too big. And then he came up with 5,050. And that was the answer. And he turned it into his teacher. And his teacher was just awestruck. Like, how could somebody add up 100 numbers in under 5 minutes and get the right answer? But this happens a lot in life, and it happens a lot in math. You just have to look at things the right way. And things can be very difficult or very easy. So I wanted to show you another one. The next one is finding the area of this green rectangle. It's really hard because it's oriented wrong. And to try to figure this out with just a pencil and a piece of paper is very, very difficult. Because usually in school they give us the rectangle, a nice rectangle that lines up with the coordinate system. But this one's off and it's crooked. So we know the area is width times length, but we don't know what the width is, and we don't know what the length is. I mean, we know it's there, but we don't know what the numbers are. So there's something in math called a transformation, a linear transformation, and we sometimes call it a change of basis. So what we want to do is we don't want to work in that coordinate system that's not aligned with the rectangle. We want to work with a coordinate system that lines up with the rectangle. So it's much easier to do this. It's much easier to draw a new coordinate system that lines up with the rectangle. And then what we want to do is move that down so it lines up with the coordinate system. So now it's really easy. The width is, you can tell just by looking, it's 2, and the length is 3. So the area is 6. So there's a lot of things like this in math where if you kind of visualize it differently, everything changes. And it took me a long time. I used to do math with brute force, and I did life with brute force. But if you kind of look at it differently and kind of lean into it, things can be easy and fun rather than difficult and hard. So what's really neat is there's something in Buddhism called the very same thing, and it's about how our mind works. And it's called a transformation of basis or a change of basis, just like in mathematics. So by practicing Buddhism, by listening to the Dharma, the problems in our life are solvable in an alternate way by looking at things differently, much like those two math examples. And it's also called a change of basis, even in Buddhism. So I felt this deep connection between math and Buddhism. It's the same idea, and they use the same type of language. It's also called a transformation of basis, a fundamental change of basis, or turning around the basis. They use these kinds of words in Buddhism. And it's the basis of your mind, the foundational thinking of your mind. And everything in your mind is conditional and contextual. So if we can change the context of the way we think, everything changes. So it's not really the world that needs to change, it's the way we look at it and the way we engage in it. And the things we pay attention to and the things we focus on determine the world that we create for ourselves and the world that we live in. So on a side note, for New Year's Eve, I've cut way down on caffeine, like way down. And then I quit watching the news. And I feel so relaxed now. Like, my wife Linda told me to talk slow. And I said, oh, it's easy now, right? Because I'm not getting all these triggers, and I'm not addicted to my phone, and I'm not checking on who said what to who anymore. And I just feel the world just seems like a very safe and peaceful place to me now, because I'm looking at it through a different lens. So everything we hear, say, smell, and feel, and taste creates experiences for us. And it kind of creates a lens through which we see the world. So, we develop mental habits, and we can become impatient or aggressive if that's all we see and that's all we are around. And so the way we change that around in Buddhism is we find other habits, other activities that can give us a different context. So hearing, listening to the Dharma, saying Namo Amida Butsu and chanting, smelling the incense, feeling the Dharma in your body and your heart, and tasting. I wasn't sure about tasting. You're not supposed to eat in the Hondo. But when you eat your food, really take the time to appreciate it and really be thankful for the meal you're taking. So everything that comes into our senses creates this context for the way we think. And in our tradition of Buddhism, by merely changing those contexts, we naturally change our frame of reference, just like the selected reading we had before my Dharma talk. And so what this is kind of showing is there's a feedback loop. You have your senses, you have your thoughts, and then it kind of creates these mental habits that become ingrained, and you're unaware of it. And then this is one of my most favorite pictures. We do this a lot. It's called confirmation bias. We only notice things in the world that kind of agree with our opinions. So, and we do this with prejudices and racism. We only notice things about people that agree with our ideas. So, if you think older people don't drive as well as younger people, then when somebody drives bad and they're old, it proves it to you. But when they're young, you don't really notice it, or you write it off as, well, maybe they're in a hurry because they have an important job, or maybe they were on their phone. And so we merely see the world in a way that confirms what we already believe. And so we're kind of projecting. So I really like this. The other thing we do a lot is we mistake our opinions for facts. I try real hard not to do this. Like, I have opinions which are okay, but I don't want to assume and accept them as facts. So that's very subtle. It's very subtle, but it happens all the time. You think something, and therefore it must be true. It's kind of the other way around. If it's true, you could think it. And so I wanted to show you an example of this. I might have gotten this from a member of our temple. I get a lot of crowdsourcing. This is a dog and a man sitting on a bench looking out into nature. And what does the dog see? The dog's fully present, and he sees the forest, and he's at one with the experience. But the man is thinking about money and homes and travel and cars. And so they're having two totally different experiences of the same event because of filters. So I think my dog would just be thinking about food. He'd be going, food. And then I wanted to share with you two books. This one's by Thich Nhat Hanh, the famous Vietnamese Buddhist who passed away in 2022. He wrote a really good book about this school of Buddhism. It's a philosophical school. It's called Yogachara. And it's different from the school of emptiness and the middle way. So Zen tends to focus on emptiness, and our tradition tends to focus on our mind and how it works. And Shinran talks a lot about being deluded, being foolish, not seeing things clearly, right? This isn't really a discussion about emptiness or oneness. It's more about the way we cognize the world and ourselves. So Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a lot of very popular general public books, but this book is much more academic and scholarly, and he explains it quite well. And the cover has a lot of meaning. We might talk about it at an adult discussion, but it took me years to figure out why there's a bowl full of oranges. So the oranges is all the sensory input into your mind, and the bowl is the great mind that accepts everything as it is. So that's what that image is. And then another book, there's not very many books on this in English. There's one called Living Yogachara. It's written by a Japanese scholar, and it's more poetic, it's more effective, it's more about emotions and feelings. And sometimes Yogachara Buddhism is called consciousness only or mind only. And in the West, it's an extreme version of idealism. Sometimes you hear the quote in Buddhism, I create the world with my mind. So it almost sounds like the world doesn't exist, but the world exists, but the one I inhabit is the one I pay attention to. So I kind of construct my own reality. So the world is here, but we're all kind of living in our own bubbles. So he says the central tenet is said to be that consciousness only, which means more precisely, nothing but the transformation of consciousness. So in our school of Buddhism, everything we do, everything we say, everything we experience is a transformation of our consciousness. And we could use that on our Buddhist path to realize insight. So what I'd like to do is close with a couple of poems. This is a little bit like The Dog and the Man Looking at Nature. This is kind of a famous Japanese poem written in the Japanese style of syllables. So it goes like this. At the clapping of hands, the carp comes swimming for food, the birds fly away in fright, and a maiden comes carrying tea. So you have to think about that for a while and go. It's like if we were Zen, you have to think about this for a while and then tell me what it means. But what it means is there's one event, hands clapping, but each element in the poem experiences it totally differently. The carp think of hands clapping as a call to food. It's mealtime. Birds see it as something scary and frightful and fly away. And the maiden thinks it's time to serve tea. So, this is what happens. We all have our own impressions of things, and we're all living in our own realities, and then we tend to argue with one another because we just don't see things the same way. And it's okay. It's okay. In a sense, they're all right. Every one of them is correct in their world. And then I kind of think this one's, Buddhism, we jab one another once in a while. I think it's like brothers picking on each other. It's challenging schools back and forth, but I really like this poem. This is a very Jodo Shinshu poem. It kind of draws a contrast between Jodo Shinshu, everyday Buddhism, practicing in your everyday life, versus a monastic style of Buddhism where you go in isolation out into the mountains somewhere. So it says, the great recluse hides himself in the city markets. The minor recluse hides deep in the mountains. So it takes a great Jodo Shinshu Buddhist to be able to live within the city markets and be a recluse, be a monk, be deeply connected to the Dharma in your everyday life. So this is what our tradition tries to do, is how can you have the depth of a monastic up in the mountains of Japan while driving the 405 as an everyday person, right? So that's the Great Recluse, being the Great Recluse while still living in the hustle and bustle of everyday life and always being peaceful and at one with yourself and seeing things clearly. So this is why in our tradition, it tends to be more based on senses. Our altars are incredibly elaborate. This is actually like an advertisement for insight and awakening. I've mentioned before that when my wife and I first came here in 1997 for the Hanamatsuri festival, we came into the Hondo and the lights were dimmed and the incense were burning and the altar lights were on, and we were both taken back by the smell of incense, and it took our breath away. And I remember thinking, I want my life to feel the way that looks. I want my life to look and feel this way. It was a feeling. My senses were overwhelmed. And it comes at you from all angles, right? It's sight and smell and sound. And so this is the idea of Jodo Shinshu, is we put ourselves in the middle of a Sangha, we practice together, and by changing your environment, you change the way you think. And it's effortless. Everything that you intake through your senses affects the way you cognize the world. And all you have to do is just pick a different environment. And a different environment creates a different world that you live in. And so this is how we make math problems easier, and this is how we make life easier, by changing the foundational assumptions that we live under and having them open for debate and being free to hear new ideas. When I read books now on Buddhism, it's not whether I agree with the author or not. Like when people ask you, did you like the book? It usually means, did you agree with the author? I kind of like it when I don't agree with the author, because I learn new things. It's what I learned from the book, not so much whether I agree with them or not. So, that's another way of foundationally changing your life. It's not a matter of agreement. It's a matter of sharing ideas and learning and being open. In the larger sutra, vow number 33, it says that when you begin to say Namo Amida Butsu, your mind becomes supple and soft and malleable and open. And this is the way of Jodo Shinshu. This is the way we find peace, and this is the way we find harmony. So it's an appreciation. Changing your appreciation of life gives new meaning to it moving forwards. So I hope this helps you in Buddhism, and I hope it helps you in mathematics, right? My daughter teaches mathematics at Pacifica High School in Garden Grove, and they're teaching algebra now to like 7th and 8th graders. So GALFs may become very handy for you soon when your teacher needs a break. All right, please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Naman Dabutsu. Thank you very much.